Hi everybody, welcome to this week's edition of the Oldish TV. My name is Karen Brown. I'm happy to be back as your host, and this week we're going to talk about a subject that interests everybody. Food. Yeah, food. You know, we don't all like beets and Brussels sprouts, but food is something that we all require to maintain our strength. And when you apply those kinds of ideas to aging seniors, it becomes even more important. You know, there's a lot of emphasis on diet, but what about the idea of food as medicine? We've talked about that the odd time before. We've written a couple of articles about it, which you can find on our website at theoldish.com. However, there is a new movement that I have discovered, a new website that is taking the food as medicine movement to a completely different level. They're talking about it as serious medicine for the healing of patients who are in acute care hospitals or long-term care facilities as well. And I think that that's something that requires a bit more discussion and some thought, because really, whether you have a loved one who is in the hospital or long-term care or aging in place, and perhaps you are looking after them, perhaps you have a mother or a father who is living with you, and the idea of thinking about food as medicine for them to give them greater strength, to give them the ability to be more successful in their cognitive life, in their physical well-being. It's all a really interesting subject. Now, I'm going to show you this website that came to my attention. It's called Nourish Healthcare CA. So it's a Canadian website, but as I looked through it, I was tremendously impressed by the kinds of projects that they had going on. But just look at their value statement here. We are working for a more enabling policy environment that will encourage healthcare to value, measure, and procure local and sustainable foods that support health and healing. We're all in this day and age where long-term care facilities and hospitals as well, are looking at cutting budgets because the funding just isn't there. Now, I'm not going to debate the value of funding. This is not the place for that. But what I do want you to be aware of is that when budgets are applied to food, to the exclusion of everything else, we may end up with an environment that actually does not support the healing of patients the way that we would like. So let's go back now to, this is the article that was posted on the Oldish website just the other day. And they are looking at the fact that it costs $2,000 more. And that patient may stay an extra 2 to 3 days longer in hospital. So if you want to talk about hospital budgets, let's peel this data into the picture as well. 2 to 3 days longer is an increased care to hospitals and to their staff, and $2,000 more is the actual monetary cost of having them in hospital for 2 to 3 days more. So that article is on our website when you want to take a look at it. However, let's go back to the Nourish site. They have all kinds of projects going on. Indigenous foodways, food for health policy, sustainable menus, measuring patient food experience. Now that is something that's really interesting, because I think what you'll find is that if you've been in hospital and you have an exit questionnaire at some point. Most hospitals do because they measure everything. One of the things they ask about is the food, but they don't tend to ask about it in the right way. Every hospital is going to have their own question. However, this Nourish Healthcare CA measurement tool is looking for real value in improving the patient food experience. Now, they've got quite a project team. I mean, look at this. This is a heavyweight team that is bringing in people from Alberta Health Services, Regina Capel Health Region, Covenant, Alberta Health Services, Central Health. These are very major players in healthcare. I know it's in Canada, but you may have something comparable if you're watching us from the US or from the UK or someplace in Europe. But this is something certainly that you can point your local healthcare providers to as projects that are actively working to measure. Now let's look at their measurement tool results. Look at this. They are actually looking at a whole bunch of things across a range. They're measuring the look of the food because we eat with our eyes first, don't we? The smell of the food. Now, I find it interesting that they are measuring the smell of the food, but not to the exclusion of everything else. As you know, in the senior population, a lot of older people do lose their sense of smell. They can also lose their sense of taste as they get older. And when they're taking different medications, that can color the taste experience. So they're really looking at a range of things. The texture of the food. I'm a texture girl, so I really value something that has a great deal of texture as a component, whether it is a design feature or my food. I don't like everything to look like pablum when I sit down to eat. The temperature of the food. Now that's interesting. Did it come to you hot? Did it come to you cold? Did it come to you somewhere in the middle? The combination of foods. Now, isn't that a really interesting one? And look at the score on that. 56.5 was a rating that they got. So, you know, almost half of the people in this particular survey weren't loving the combination. The overall quality of the food. Now, a lot of hospitals are using, and I dare say long-term care facilities, are using something called retherm. What retherm is that food is purchased from a central supplier, because we're watching our costs, right? Purchased from a central supplier. They are prepared to an extent. So potatoes are made into mashed potatoes. Vegetables are cut down into serving size pieces. Meat is cooked to an acceptable temperature, whatever the meat happens to be. And then it's frozen. It's frozen, packaged up, and it's sent out to the various hospitals and long-term care facilities. And when they get it there, I believe the frozen packages are taken out 2 to 3 days in advance according to the menu plan, and they are thawed, and then they are put into a unit on wheels. It's a retherm unit. And so it reheats the foods to the temperature that you set it at. I think that's a very crude explanation of it, but you get the drift. That is called retherm food. Now, what do they save by doing that? They save the cost of a cook in the kitchen. They save the cost of perhaps purchasing locally. Is there a difference? I suppose with some things there could be a difference. They get to purchase foods that are coming in from other countries. So vegetables that are grown in Mexico or South America in the off-season, they come in and they purchase them at a lower cost than in the summertime you would be able to purchase them locally. Is that good or bad? That's not part of this discussion. I'll just say that the overall quality of the food matters. If a tray of food is put in front of you and you won't eat it, then you become malnourished. If the food isn't appetizing, if it doesn't smell right, if it doesn't look like something you'd want to eat, then you're going to become malnourished, and that is going to affect your healing process. That is the whole point of the project of this company. That is the Nourish Healthcare CA organization that is going to influence how you heal. And what they really want to do is be able to have people heal to the best of their ability and then go home well-nourished, in a healed state based on how they came into the hospital, because they came in with something, with their medications balanced, with them having the ability to ambulate properly, with them having the ability to look after their daily living tasks inside the house and outside. You know, there are a lot of goals that a hospital has for releasing patients back into their normal environment. So, you know, that is something that is very important, to pay attention to the food that we eat and to see the part that that plays in our healing. Now, I'm going to show you also, just to veer the topic into something else, I'm going to show you an article that we just published yesterday. Let me just get it up here for you. There it is. And it has to do with seniors suffering food insecurity. And more often, that is happening. So this was published on May 28th. And this is based on some American data, but you can expect that proportionately, it's not going to be that different in Canada. This is a Chicago-based organization called Feeding American. 5.5 million older adults are struggling with food insecurity. And it's estimated that by 2050, in the US, that could reach 8 million. That's an awful lot of people. Now, I actually came across an article in my news feed 2 days ago that talked about a grassroots project. It was a group of seniors who are living in a small urban center and in a seniors housing project that was a low-income seniors housing project. And these ladies recognized, there were two or three ladies heading up the project. They realized that many people just within their own project were going hungry. Now, this was a Canadian news article, so again, mirroring the experience in the US. What these ladies had done was set up essentially a food hamper for their own project. Nobody had a lot, but those who had some demonstrated a willingness to share with those who had nothing. And so they were allowing these people, had a bit of a process set up, they were allowing the people who had challenges of food insecurity to come and shop at the project food bank 3 times a month, I believe they were allowed to come. So, you know, that is a group of people who were looking after their own. Even if they get you balanced in the hospital, if you go home and you are challenged by food insecurity, you will not be well. Your wellness is not a given. So that was a really interesting article to me, that it tied in very well with this subject that I wanted to talk about with you today. So the team that is putting together this Nourish Health group is looking at ethics, they're looking at local sustainability, they're looking at a budget, and they're balancing that with how patients are treated within the hospital. I remember reading somewhere in one of the articles on their website that the ideal situation was essentially to have a menu, not just the tray that is plopped down in front of you and that's what dinner is, by getting seniors involved in their own nourishment, by letting them choose their favorite foods. And of course, with Indigenous people, that's going to look very different than it would look in a major urban center or even a rural environment in small town Canada or small town US. So I want to leave you with those thoughts today. Please do be open to sharing these concepts with your local healthcare providers, with your local physician, because the more something is talked about, the more it has the opportunity to become a reality. If we don't talk about this, if we are people who have sufficient and we don't show the compassion to talk about it openly with those that matter, our own local physicians, our own local healthcare providers in a wider space, so chiropractors, occupational therapists, nurse practitioners, dentists, because yes, people who are malnourished probably also can't afford to go to the dentist, so it's a very broad conversation, and I encourage you to have it. Thank you for joining us with our show today. I do appreciate having you here. I do appreciate your attention to the issues that we talk about. I read the comments below, and I assure you I get a lot of direct messages from people about the various subjects because they are personally impacted, but a little bit shy, depending on the subject, even embarrassed to talk about it out loud. But you know, this is a conversation that we can all be having. So to the extent that you are comfortable doing so, I invite you to carry on the conversation after the show. And maybe you've got solutions that we haven't thought of. Maybe you have direct experience with some of this. Let's have the conversation because that's how it gets better. Please do remember to take care of one another. I welcome you to join us next Wednesday at 12 noon for another edition of the Oldish TV. Until then, please do take care of yourselves and remember that it does take a village to age a senior.